Hello, this is Christine Zeitler with Prendergast Library. There are some close-up views of my fingers which do have bad hangnails. If you know how to sew, this is not the video for you. I'm not an expert, however I can create functional stitching, which is what this video is about. Today I am going to show you how to create a ladder stitch for a seam that is nearly invisible. This stitch is worked from the right side of the fabric, so if you're following along you need to turn your piece inside out so the right side is facing out. Once you have the dark side facing you, you will want to poke slightly at the corners with your finger so they look a little bit better. Do not worry about any stray threads or anything that is unusual. You will be able to trim those up at the end. Taking a look at the two sides we have already stitched up, you can see that a small amount of thread will be poking through at the seam. Don't worry about that. If you press the seams down, then the crisp edges will hide any threads that are poking out, but even if you don't, it will still be a functional seam, and as long as you don't pull at it, you will not see the threads. To get started with the final edge, we are going to take the raw edge of the fabric and begin folding it down onto itself to create a rounded edge to work from. Again, if you would like a crisp edge to work from, then you can press them down, and that will create a crisp edge. I start at the corner and try to tuck the fabric all the way down the seam. It will not stay unless you use an iron to press the seam or pins to hold it down. However, folding it all the way down and finger pressing it will give you an idea of what your seam should look like. I use my fingers to press it down a little bit, and then to begin you insert your needle and take a small horizontal stitch on one seam of the fabric. I started on the right hand side, then next I made a horizontal stitch on the left hand side opposite of my first stitch. Since I wanted a strong seam to start with, I then made my next stitch closer to the corner on the right hand side of the fabric in a sort of back stitch. I mirrored this on the left hand side and tugged the thread to close the corner stitching up before moving forward to stitch up the rest of the seam. I always begin with a horizontal stitch on the right hand side of the fabric, which I then mirror on the left hand side to create a ladder effect with my stitching down the piece. I'm not concerned about pulling the stitches tightly yet, just making the stitches as tidy as I am able. Once you have a full ladder of stitches all the way across your seam, the magic happens. By gently pulling on your working thread, you will see the seam close as though by magic. I love this as a way to hide a seam almost invisibly. I then took an extra stitch at the corner of the fabric just to make it as secure as possible. To hide the thread, I inserted it into the seam and pulled it up at a random place. After I pulled the thread all the way through, I snipped it close to the edge of the fabric. I took a few minutes to clean up any stray threads, and I have a finished piece. For a cleaner look, I could iron down the seams. To play with hiding or patching holes, decorative stitching, and even more, I recommend checking out some books from the library on mending, stitching, embroidery, and other sewing techniques. These are great ways to get more life out of your clothing. I would love to see your stitching on the Prendergast Library Facebook or Instagram pages.